Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development CropTalk webinar. If you have any questions during today's presentation, please type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Lise. I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 11th edition of Crop Talk. We're seeing some harvesting happening out there, and a lot of peas being done, some early seeded oats and some barley coming off. And right now, yields are probably looking around average for most areas. Some areas maybe below average. But I guess right now in general, I'd say we're probably about average. And the rainfall we received this last little while here is definitely gonna help some of the later seeded crops, some of the later seeded canola crops, definitely help out the soybeans, and hopefully help out the corn and sunflowers. Today's webinar, we are getting ready, I guess, our planning for next year, and I thought it would be a good time to talk about winter wheat and fall rye. I think it's on the back of quite a few producers' minds right now because of the dry conditions, and maybe looking at taking advantage of any moisture we get this fall and in spring. So I think we might see a return to some of these winter crops. So we have Alex Griffith on, and he's from Ducks Unlimited and works quite a bit with winter wheat, and he's going to also touch a little bit on fall rye. After that, we're going to have Kim Brown on. She's going to update us on Waterhemp. She's been able to, I guess, find more of it in the province, and she wanted to maybe just give us a little bit of an update. And then we're going to get her to talk a little bit about some desiccation tips where probably some of the biggest concerns now is timing and timing before harvest. So Kim's going to cover that. And then we're going to go to our crop scouting panel and have a few questions that have come in over the last couple of weeks here. So we'll get them to talk about some of the things that are happening. So I guess with that, Felice, let's turn it over to Alex, and let's start his presentation on the winter wheat and fall rye for 2022.
Thanks, Lionel. Can you see my screen and hear me okay?
You bet.
Perfect. Alrighty. Good morning, everyone. I'm Alex Griffiths, an agrologist with Ducks Unlimited, and my presentation today is Winter Cereals, How to Profit in Dry Conditions. Just a quick disclaimer that I work mainly in the southwestern part of the province. The map on the left shows the fields that I've been scouting this year, with a heavy distribution north of Brandon. I also work specifically with winter wheat, but have experience with fall rye, and will briefly touch on that as well. For today, I'll do a quick 2021 recap, then talk about variety selection, stubbles to seed into, seeding date, rate, and depth, then go into fertility, fall rye, and why you should grow a winter cereal. So the weather this year has been very dry and very hot, which is a tough combo. The map on the left shows percent normal precipitation from May to August, which is below normal for nearly the entire province. The map on the right shows percent normal growing degree days, which is above normal for the entire province, with many days too hot for most crops to be growing at all. With the lack of fall moisture and snow in 2020, we also started 2021 with less subsoil moisture than usual. This has been problematic, as it made us more reliant on rainfall, which has been few and far between. The other trouble the maps don't tell is when the moisture happened. There was pretty much no moisture until early June, and winter cereals need good rains in early May for bumper yields. The 2020 winter had very little snowfall to help insulate the overwintering crops. The graph on the right is from a soil probe at Wadeau in Melita, and it shows soil temperature at the 1 inch depth on the y-axis and the month or date on the x-axis. The blue line is actual temperature at the 1 inch depth, while the black line shows estimated cold tolerance of winter wheat. So basically, as long as the blue line stays above the black line, the crop should still be winter hardy and have no winter kill damage. The red dots on the far right are February, when it warmed up, as seen by the spike upwards on the blue line, then back down below -20 afterwards for 9 winter kill days. The picture on the left is a bag test that I took of that field at the end of March, where it surprisingly overwintered very well with vigorous roots. The soil probe data this soil probe data for each crop diversification center in Manitoba can be found, and some other sites across the prairies, at the website below, which is wheatworkers.ca. Assessing winter survival is an important and often difficult decision. I personally like plants per square foot as it follows a good bell curve, where 25 to 30 plus is ideal, 13 plus is still about 90% of your expected yield, and 7 to 8 green and growing plants is the threshold that I use for reseeding. Yet, if left to grow, that 7 to 8 plants can still surprise with its exceptional ability to tiller and is about 80% of expected yield. The table on the left is from 1999, so it is outdated, as the maximum yield of the newer varieties is probably 80 to 100 bushels per acre if weather cooperates. Easy versus tough decisions. These are 2 fields near Brandon I checked this spring. The left picture is Gateway seeded into a plowdown stubble on September 5th. And this was very disappointing to see the field like this, because it was 3 to 4 leaf with a tiller going into the winter, and by May 18th it was an obvious reseed. I would like to say though that if you go and check a field that looks like this in April, it may still make it, but by mid-May it's time to seed something else. The field on the right is Emerson seeded into a pea oat stubble on September 1st. My apologies for the poor quality picture. And when I checked this field, it was anywhere from 13 to 19 green and growing plants per square foot, and I think that it probably would have turned out okay. But it was reseeded that day to, well, $20 canola is pretty hard to turn down. This is another one I wanted to showcase. This was a demo field of ducks near Shoal Lake. It was showing Emerson and Wildfire in a side-by-side comparison. It was seeded on the same day in the first week of September with good fertility and no differences at all other than variety. The Emerson was completely winter killed and reseeded, while the Wildfire ended up being probably one of the nicer fields I scouted all year. It just goes to show how much of a difference winter hardiness can make when we don't get the snow we usually do. Jumping ahead a bit now, once we got past May, June and July flew by. And I'd say about 2/3 of the fields that I checked had an in-crop herbicide like Bucktrol M, but some just rely on the pre-seed burn down for perennial and winter annuals, which is often enough. The picture on the left was taken June 14th, and it is leaf tip necrosis of the penultimate leaf. With so many plus 30 days, I saw lots of leaf tip necrosis, which is caused by hot, dry, and windy conditions. Unfortunately, there's nothing a grower can really do to prevent that, and it's pretty much just another kick in the pants that was 2021. On the right is the Fusarium Headblade risk map for June 19th, around when winter wheat was flowering. It shows low to moderate risk for the province due to lack of moisture and humidity. All fields will have some amount of Fusarium head blight or leaf diseases even this year, but just at very low incidence. And I'd say about 1/3 of the producers I worked with this year still sprayed a fungicide on their winter wheat. Pre-harvest timing. It's a little late for this one in winter cereals, but just can't stress enough how important it is. Please make sure before spraying that you check the greenest parts of your field and that they pass the thumbnail test and are less than 30% seed moisture. This will keep the crop saleable in all markets. And also, if these areas of the field are more green with wheat than green with weeds, they are likely to be your highest yielding areas and are worth waiting for or harvesting separately. So that's a quick wrap up of what we saw in 2021. Now on to planning for seeding this fall. Variety selection. Wildfire is my go-to variety in Manitoba. It has the best winter survivability and yield currently on the market. In Alberta, under irrigation, it has reached yields of 130 plus bushels per acre. So I think under dryland conditions, 90 to 100 bushels is not out of the question if everything cooperates. It is also moderately resistant to Fusarium head blight. The biggest knock on wildfire is that it is susceptible to stem rust, but a preventative fungicide application takes care of that.
Cool,
It is also, oh, hello?
I think you're okay. Just keep going.
Sorry, Lionel. It is also very recognizable from its bronze-colored heads, as you can see in this picture. Next variety I want to talk about is Gold Rush, which is on par with wildfire as an excellent option in my opinion. It also has very good winter hardiness, good yields, and a higher protein grain. If you are looking for a good yielding variety that can survive a tough Manitoba winter, wildfire or Gold Rush are your best options currently, and there is decent seed supply in the province too. Next variety is Elevate, which is one of the most consistent varieties out there yield-wise. It does quite well in dry conditions, but only average given perfect conditions. It has good winter hardiness, a good disease package, and a short, upright straw. Given the year we've been having, Elevate is a good play-it-safe option if drought conditions persist. Emerson is the old standard in the province. It is Fusarium head blight resistant, which helped its popularity during the wet years and in the early 2010s. If grown for feed, its low vomitoxin levels are very desirable in a hog ration. It has good winter hardiness, but not as good as wildfire or Gold Rush, as I mentioned earlier, where it winter killed when wildfire did not. Unless you are really concerned about Fusarium, I personally think that there are better varieties to grow for both yield and winter hardiness. Gateway is another widely available variety in Manitoba. It has good yields, high protein, good disease resistance, and is very short in stature. I'll be honest, I have a recency bias against Gateway, as it only has fair winter hardiness and was easily the most common culprit for a reseeded field this past spring. That being said, if the winters are mild and it gets through untouched, Gateway is a great yielder and checks a lot of boxes in the pros column. I just wanted to quickly touch on two new varieties that will be widely available hopefully for 2022. Network is a Gateway replacement that improves its disease and drought resistance while improving the winter hardiness from fair to good. Network will be a great option for anyone looking for short straw and high protein. Vortex is an Emerson replacement that I am very excited about. It will be higher yielding with better leaf disease resistance than Emerson, but the best part is it has very good winter hardiness, an upgrade from Emerson's just good hardiness. This will put it with wildfire and Gold Rush for being able to survive the toughest winters. If anyone is looking for seed, I attached a link to the Grow Winter Wheat website that has a list of what seed dealers in Manitoba have available. Once you've chosen a variety, next is selecting a suitable stubble. When selecting a stubble, it is nice to have some snow catchability, but I find that that is often overvalued and time of seeding is more important. I would rather have winter wheat seeded the last week of August into a pea stubble than the third week of September into canola stubble, as the bigger the crown, the better the winter survival. I think canola is still the best stubble option, but if it is late harvested, barley is an excellent alternative. Byron Irving's research at Ag Canada in Brandon showed that green feed barley was the second best stubble choice after canola. With harvest so early this year, barley taken for seed will be similar in timing of harvest to barley taken for feed in a normal year. Make sure that it is 2-row barley though, as 2-row loses its germ quickly in the fall, so volunteers are not an issue, whereas 6-row barley maintains its germ and can be a volunteer problem the following spring. Pea stubble can be risky since there isn't really any stubble for snow catch, but it is harvested early and warms up quickly the following spring. So if the winter wheat is seeded early enough into it and makes it through the winter, the results I've seen have been very positive. Other options like oats, flax, or summer fallow are available, but not preferred if given the option over canola, barley, or pea. And lastly, I'd avoid fall rye or wheat stubbles due to volunteers and wheat streak mosaic virus. As I mentioned on the last slide, seeding date is more important than stubble, and the earlier the better for seeding. This graph shows yield percentage on the y-axis based on seeding date on the x-axis. The graph itself is actually talking about spring wheat yields based on when it is seeded for a comparison to a late seeding of winter wheat. And it shows that your highest yield potential is if sown between the last week of August to the third week of September. But that being said, the MASC deadlines were changed last year for both winter wheat and fall rye to September 25th for full coverage and September 30th for extended coverage, as seen at the very top of this slide. Basically, the main point of this study is showing how late September seeding would be equivalent to seeding spring wheat the third week of May. And that's just to say that late seeding is not catastrophic, it just lowers your yield potential a little bit. Next is seeding rate. This chart shows seeding rate based off of 1,000 kernel weight and desired plants per square foot. I like targeting 30 plus plants per square foot, which depending on seed size is around 2 to 2.5 bushels per acre roughly, as seen in the difference between Emerson and Wildfire in your seed size or 1,000 kernel weights. That extra half a bushel, even if it costs you $6 or $7 an acre, is very much worth it in my opinion for a competitive, vigorous stand and is cheap insurance. This is a really good visualization of how much more competitive a stand can be if seeded a little heavy. I talked with John Glavoski and he brought up an excellent point. If you're in an area with bad grasshoppers currently, a newly emerged winter cereal stand can be the best hopper food around and could be ravaged by the pests this fall. Some options to combat this are delaying seeding towards the end of the recommended window where feeding is lessened, or seeding the headlands heavier since ditches and roadsides are where the grasshoppers are more abundant. I personally like that option as headlands also deal with things like compaction and other factors that make emergence and winter survival tougher from the start, whereas delaying seeding can compromise the stand's yield potential and winter survival. Seed depth. This picture doesn't show it clearly, but the winter wheat on the left was seeded at 1-inch depth, compared to the winter wheat on the right seeded at 2-inch depth. The plant vigor is severely reduced on the right in comparison. Seed depth was a big topic of conversation in the spring about chasing moisture, but for fall seeding, it never changes. Seed at about 1 inch and wait for the rains that will usually delay our harvests. Last year was an abnormally dry fall, and most producers who seeded had their fields germinate on only 3/10 of rain. Knock on wood, we get more rain than that, but also knock on wood, we don't have a fall like 2019 either. Anyways, the key message is seed shallow and don't wait for moisture. Put it in the ground at the first good opportunity, and the rain will eventually come, hopefully. Fertility is a much discussed and researched topic in winter wheat. The best advice is to get 50% of your nitrogen down in the fall. Our springs are usually either too wet or too dry, and rarely in that Goldilocks zone. This makes spring application difficult to get on the field or difficult to get the nitrogen to the plant roots where it's needed. Since seed head is developed early, yield is mostly determined by jointing, which is around the 4 to 6 leaf stage. That happens around mid-May, so it's hugely important to have that nutrition available to the plant in order to develop a big healthy seed head and maximize yield potential. P and K are also very important, as these nutrients are especially important for seedlings and are less available in cold temperatures. A winter cereal makes 2 seedlings in cold soil, so having plant available P and K is hugely important. Since both P and K are mobile, having some in or near the seed row is completely necessary. Finally, soil test to find out what is available, and maybe you can save a little on your fertilizer bill, catch a deficiency before it happens. This is just a slide showing what an average Manitoba spring is like, although we've been far from average for the last couple of years. Just further shows how important having some nitrogen down in the fall is. Switching gears here, I'll talk about fall rye. This picture shows a field of winter wheat on the left and a field of hybrid fall rye on the right. Fall rye starts growing at a lower temperature than winter wheat in the spring, and this is why we've seen 100+ bushel per acre yields under dryland conditions when it can take advantage of lots of snowmelt or an early spring rain. This slide shows where the yield is coming from based on what crop you are working with. Wheat gets most of its yield from the leaves, particularly flag and penultimate leaf. Rye is more from the stalk and the ear, while triticale is mostly leaves, but a lot from the lower leaves as well. I think that this information is important in showing things like why a flagleaf fungicide timing is effective in wheat, as keeping the flagleaf greener longer will only increase your yields. That's not to say that a flag leaf fungicide timing is less important in rye or triticale. I just think that it's interesting to see how much each plant organ contributes to final yield. The management of seeding fall rye is very similar to winter wheat. Seed early into stubble, seed shallow, and wait for the rain to cause germination. Rye has a better winter hardiness than winter wheat, so the seeding rate is reduced to reflect that. And for good winter survival, you usually want 3 to 4 leaves and ideally 1 tiller going into the winter. Fertility points are also the same for winter as for fall rye and winter wheat. You get 50% of your nitrogen down in the fall, have adequate P and K levels for producing 2 seedlings in cold temperatures. Fall rye has had a big resurgence recently with hybrid fall ryes. They are close to canola in seed cost, but around 30% higher yielding than conventional varieties like Hazlitt. They are also shorter and have a better falling number as well, making them very desirable. As you can see in the picture, Hazlitt on the right is quite a few inches taller than the hybrid rye beside it. The table on the left is blurry, but what it's showing is that Bono outyielded Hazlitt in the Alberta Seed Guide, by 36% in the Alberta Seed Guide in 2020. For variety selection, conventional varieties are mostly Hazlitt, Prima, or Danko, with Hazlitt being the go-to option. If you're looking for a low input and low maintenance crop, conventional fall rye is great and a much better option than planting hybrid fall rye and not feeding it to its full potential. As for the hybrids, there are now close to 10 hybrid varieties on the market, and mostly they're focused on increasing yield like Bono or reducing ergot like Gaetano. The newest varieties, Trebbiano, Serafino, and Daniello, are getting good at doing both, as before them, I knew some growers who would seed Gaetano on the headlands and Bono on the rest of the field, because this would reduce their ergot risk on the more susceptible field edges without compromising yield across the entire field. So, putting it all together, why grow winter cereals? To make money, of course. With the early harvest this year, there should be plenty of time to get it sown in good time this fall. The improved water use efficiency compared to spring cereals means increased yields, and having it planted in the fall stops the soil from blowing and reduces the stress of a busy spring. Once they start growing, they start growing as soon as it's warm, meaning they outcompete most annual weeds and can reduce herbicide resistance due to this. The early harvest is also a nice way to test out the combine and iron out any kinks before the mechanics are busy and cost double in the heat of the harvest. The table on the top right is the August 10th, so yesterday's price list for the Gilbert Plains Parish and Heimbecker. Winter wheat is catching up to those high crop prices at nearly $9.50 off the combine. Fall rye is also up, and I've heard around anywhere from $7 to $7.50 a bushel. This year has been mostly horrible, yet the producers I've worked with have been harvesting winter wheat with yields anywhere from 43 to 62 bushels per acre on their fields that were drier and ready to harvest early. Those probably aren't the yields that these folks wanted when they planted it, but compared to other crops in the same region, it is better than some of the really early spring wheats or barleys that are coming off right now. Most producers will usually forward contract somewhere between 30 to 50% of their expected winter wheat yields off the combine at $7 to $7.25 a bushel. So being able to sell the rest at $9.50 is really nice right now. All of these benefits are why most producers who give winter cereals a try usually keep them as part of the rotation. This is just a quick shameless plug for our program. If you need another reason to grow winter wheat and farm in southwestern Manitoba, talk to me about our winter wheat program. It offers a soil test from Western Ag for fertility recommendations, a subscription with FarmLink for marketing advice, and cash incentive for every acre grown. If you're curious or want more info on winter wheat, give me a shout or send me an email. That's all I have for today, other than a quick funny about this is my dog Boots, and he does not enjoy wearing booties in the field for clubber biosecurity. Thanks for listening, and a big thanks to all our partners.
Hey, Alex, some good information there. We've got a few questions that have come in, so I'm just going to start with them. When you're talking about the different varieties, the question was, are there differences in variety maturities? Is Wildfire later?
Yes, that's a very good question. Wildfire is the latest maturing variety on the market, which I personally think that having a later maturing variety is a good thing, because that extra 3 or 4 days doesn't really end up meaning that you're harvesting in September by any means, but it usually equates to higher yields. So yes, Wildfire will be probably, I'd say, about 3 or 4 days earlier than your Emersons or your Gateways.
Okay, and the newer varieties you mentioned?
Oh, like Vortex and Network?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to be a little bit, well, I guess a touch on the later side, but not as late as Wildfire, like probably about 2 days earlier than an Emerson.
Okay.
Or sorry, 2 days later, my bad.
Okay. You said you've seen producers combining winter wheat this year. The question was, what is the seed size like? Am I looking at having to seed? I guess more about the seeding rate.
Yeah, well, I haven't actually seen the seed size, so this would just be speculation myself, but I would imagine with the lack of moisture in most areas this year, the seed size is going to be a little bit reduced in most places. And as a result, you're probably going to have to up your seeding rate, or sorry, reduce your seeding rate to still get that same plant stand.
Okay, and then the additional question was, what about protein this year? Or, you know, just even a general question, how do you manage protein in winter wheat and say compared to hard red?
For sure. Protein this year has been up because there's still the nitrogen available to the plant that wasn't used by the other 10 or 15 bushels everyone expected to be there. So it's been up a little bit, but when you're selling, I think it's 11% protein that you need at the elevator for winter wheat is kind of where they're hoping it to be. And most varieties come off at about 11.5, or if you're sowing something like a Gateway or a Gold Rush, you can get up to a little over 12. As far as protein management goes, some guys will do like the in-season application so that they can up their protein, but usually you don't get as much of a premium on your protein for winter wheat anyways, so it's not nearly as valuable as having like that 14 or 15% protein on a hard red spring.
Okay, and you talked about ergot in fall rye. Can it be a problem in winter wheat?
It can, but I've personally never seen it be an issue. I think the only time that it would be is if you started by seeding onto something like a fall rye stubble and it was dirty with that to begin with, because it's an easy one to clean out of seed. And if it's not already on the field, the only place that it could come in would be from your ditches or roadsides. So the headlands would be the only place you'd see it.
Okay, and one question that I had was your recommendations on fall weed control. You know, should it be something that's naturally done, or what is your opinion there?
Yeah, I actually am a big fan of the fall weed control. I've seen a lot of guys who do it don't end up having to use an in-crop herbicide as well. And usually that's because like you take care of your narrow-leaf toxbeard, your flicksweed, your stinkweed, shepherd's purse, all those winter annuals. And that's usually all that you'll see in a field if you don't take care of it, is those ones are the ones that can get above the canopy in a lot of cases. But if you take care of those early, then pretty much the crops starting growing so soon can outcompete a lot of the spring annual weeds that come up. So I personally am a huge fan of it, and I think that it can end up keeping your field cleaner and saving you some money in the long run.
Okay, that's the questions that I have so far. If you can hang on for the rest of the webinar in case something else comes up, that'd be great. Comments that came in that you got a pretty good looking dog there. He takes good pictures. So, and thanks for the presentation, Alex. And Talise, if we could, let's just turn the screen over to Kim and let's get right into her presentation regarding Waterhemp and some desiccation tips.
Okay, I've made Kim the presenter.
Okay, thanks. Just let me know when you can see my screen.
I can see your screen, but it's not in slideshow mode yet.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get it there. It's just, okay.
Perfect. There you go,
Should be
Kim.
good now. Okay. There we go. Okay, so thanks very much, guys, for having me on again. And I think that Alex had some really great comments about the pre-harvest. Please make sure that we are not putting glyphosate on too early. That is the one that we are worried about the most. Our other products that we're using, obviously, we apply later than glyphosate because they work faster. I've seen a lot of problems over the years with glyphosate going on too quickly, or going on too early, sorry, on the field. And anyway, so I want to talk about the Keep It Clean website, and as well about a new water hemp population that we found, and just a reminder to be watching for this weed. So this is actually just a screenshot of the Keep It Clean website. This is a really great website, and there's a number of things on here that you can, and a lot of information on here. Earlier on in the year, we obviously have the herbicides that are allowable, or I guess not allowed in certain crops anymore, and things that we have to watch out for. There's lots of really good information. This is also a really great site for managing the pre-harvest application of glyphosate. Again, this is the one that we're most concerned about. This is the one, because it's a systemic herbicide, it can get translocated into the seed if it's put on too early. If our seed moisture is less than 30%, then we are okay. Then that won't get translocated in. There won't be any glyphosate getting into that seed. That seed will just dry down from that point on. But if we put it on before that 30%, there's the risk of glyphosate being translocated into that seed. We find MRLs, maximum residue limits in that seed. We can find glyphosate residues in those seeds, and also that obviously would affect germination and things like that. So where it's allowed, glyphosate is registered for pre-harvest weed control. It's not a desiccant. It's too slow to be a desiccant. It's really there for your perennial weeds. You have to be 30% moisture or less, and that needs to be in the least mature part of the field. And I think Alex had a great comment there too. You wait for those greener areas of the fields to ripen a bit, because lots of times there's lots of yield in there, and you're looking at that, especially if they've been able to catch some of these later rainstorms that we had in the year, and there might be a little bit more yield in there than the rest of the field in those green areas. So you want to wait for them to catch up before you're applying. So you need to look at the least mature part of the field, and it needs to be at that 30%. Always follow the label instructions, obviously, and don't harvest earlier than recommended. Although with glyphosate, we've got a long dry down period anyways. With our other products, normally we follow the recommended PHIs, which are quite short because they work quite quickly. And again, if you are tank mixing, glyphosate can be mixed with heat products, which is our group 14 saflufenicil. Then we follow the most restrictive label recommendations. So these are just some screenshots that I took off that site. If you open that site on your phone, it's got really great pictures. It's really nice to see on your phone. So if you're out in the field and you're just checking, again, this is a really great site. I guess, sorry, in the previous slide, if you look, you can subscribe for updates. If you give your email and that type of thing right here, they'll give you updates. I think that would be a really great idea. But even in field, it's easy to call up on your phone, and then you can go to the pre-harvest section of that web page, and you can find some really great pictures. Basically, with glyphosate, if we kind of split this canola plant into thirds, our bottom third needs to be completely black. Our middle third of the plant needs to be mostly brown with some speckling. And our top seeds need to be green and firm to roll. They can't be squishy. If they squish when you squeeze them, those aren't ready yet. You can't put glyphosate on yet. So you need to wait until those very top seeds are hard. They can be green. We don't need to see any color change in them, but they do need to be firm. So again, recommended harvest needs to be at least 7 to 14 days after pre-harvest glyphosate application. That's what's recommended. Normally you could harvest sooner than that, but it will take that long for the product to work and to dry down those perennial weeds that you're going after. This is from the Reglone label, and these basically, it's much more restrictive because obviously Reglone is a true desiccant. We have to be at 90%. Seeds need to be brown or black. They have to have color change, not speckled, not spotted. They have to be brown or black. So basically, if you're just counting pods, if you've got 100 pods on that plant, the top 10 will be the youngest, and basically they at least they have to be you cannot if you have more than 10% that are still green or haven't changed completely to brown or black, then you have to wait, because Reglone works very quickly. It's a really great desiccant. It dries down those weeds at the top of the canopy very, very quickly, but you have to be at that 90% or more. of the individual seeds. And again, I know our crops are stagey this year, but you really need to be looking at those greenest areas of the field, and they should be at that 90% or more, because you're going to run the risk of locking in that green seed. Your green seed will not, your green seed levels don't decrease, your green seed will not clear, or your green seed won't mature, the green doesn't clear. If you spray fields too early with Reglone, you're locking in that green seed, and that's unfortunate, because this is a really great product, and it's a really great desiccant. You just have to wait as long as you can on this one, again, until at least that 90% of color change on those seeds. So in our wheat, again, this is from the Keep It Clean site, and here's a really good picture of that thumbnail, this hard dough stage. We need to be at that 30% or less moisture, and this is where that thumbnail impression in here stays. In this case, we can see just even by the color of that seed, and there's a little bit of milk coming out of there. This is like soft dough, or maybe late milk or soft dough stage, and that is just too early. If you put a thumbnail impression in here, they just pop right back out. So I don't like showing pictures of the crop in general, because I think a lot of us, we shouldn't be looking at how green it looks. We need to get in there and look at the seeds, because it can fool you. Sometimes it can be fairly green and yet the seeds are mature. Different varieties will mature differently, and other times, you know, you can be fooled by it. But again, if it looks too green, it probably is. And I always think that we need to be putting in our glyphosate later. The right staging is usually later than you think. Again, even with wheat, check with your buyer, make sure it's an allowable use, and before you do that, because you don't want to limit yourself on markets. For barley, again, malt barley not allowed at all. Check the other markets, and again, these are the same pictures, but it's exactly the same staging. But be really careful again with barley. Make sure you know your markets, make sure you know where that's going, because it's not acceptable for sure in the malt market, because they rely on seeds to germinate in order to make that malt. And in other markets as well, there may be some restrictions. So in oats, again, this is a good picture of some oat kernels, and you can see that thumbnail dent right in here. These would be at about 30% seed moisture, sorry, and these are lower, still not able to harvest, obviously, but these are 22 to 25%. And so again, we need to be this stage or later, but this would be an acceptable stage to be applying glyphosate pre-harvest. Again, check with your buyers. Certain mills will accept glyphosate, others will not. So depending where those oats are going, especially if they're going to the mills, you have to be really careful, because a lot of the mills just don't take pre-harvest treated or pre-harvest glyphosate treated oats for milling. For peas, for Roundup, now I know a lot of peas in the province have been done already, but there are still some pea fields out there. I think there's been some issues with some pea fields with some weeds in them. There's been some issues with some herbicide residue, and some of those fields are quite green or have a lot of green spots in them. So if there was still going to be some pre-harvest spraying going on with glyphosate, we basically want most of the pods to be yellow or brown, and the seeds in the bottom pod should be detached, or they should at least rattle when they're shaken. That pod should pop right open like this, and those seeds should be rattling when you shake that plant. You can hear that. And again, check with your end use buyer of these peas. In some cases, a pre-harvest glyphosate is not allowed, but pre-harvest Reglone is. So make sure you know where these peas are going or could be going. You need to have a backup plan if quality is off or something's not right, if the protein level isn't there for certain markets. Then your backup market, make sure wherever you would sell, if your first buyer wasn't going to take the peas, make sure you know where else they can go and what else is an acceptable use for pre-harvest treatments. And in the Reglone label, this is just out of their literature. Reglone, your upper pods need to be kind of fleshy green, starting to turn yellow. The seeds might be immature in here. Your middle pods are light green to yellow and leathery, and the seeds are full size, they're not juicy, and they'll split. When you squeeze them, they'll split in half. And the bottom pods, the pods are dry and translucent, and the seeds are detached from the pods. And field peas can be ready in 5 to 7 days, as soon as 5 to 7 days after that. So, but obviously Reglone as a desiccant works a lot quicker than Roundup does. Faba beans, and this is where I just wanted to show these pictures. These are again from the Keep It Clean website. They have crop by crop good pictures and the staging that's available, the proper staging that we should be following for using a pre-harvest glyphosate. And again, This is grain moisture is less than 30%. This one, in this case, we're too early. This plant is actually a little bit yellow. There could be lots of things going on here. We could be running out of moisture. We could be running out of potassium. I think if you look at this week's crop report, John Hurd's going to be talking about potassium deficiencies in some crops because of the dry conditions that we've been experiencing. So even though this plant is fairly yellow, this is still too early. These seeds are not, these bottom pods seeds are not, they're just not ready. Whereas if you look at this plant down here, these bottom pods are turning brown to black, but the upper part of the plant is quite green. So a drive-by on this field would show this one to be quite green and this one to be quite a bit yellower. This field is actually more mature. The bottom pods are ready. We've got the seeds, like the grain moisture here is 30% and decreasing. And then if we look at our next, so this, the bottom picture here, this field is appropriately staged. This upper field, even though it looks yellower, it's not ready. So you really have to watch out for that green color on the foliage. That'll fool you. And again, this picture, sorry, it's a little bit blurry, but in this case, we've got almost all of our pods are green, are brown, sorry, most of our leaves are gone. And obviously this is very ready. You know, this is ready for pre-harvest. If there was some perennial weeds that you were going after in there, you would just want to spray and then wait for those weeds to dry down so that you could proceed with harvest. So dry beans, we're a ways away on dry beans and fabas, obviously, but dry beans too, we need to have when we're looking at pre-harvest on those for glyphosate. Sorry. We need 80%, 80 to 90% of the leaves need to drop and the pod color is changed. The upper pods can still be yellowish, but and again, with most of our pulses, we want those bottom pods, which is where the bulk of your yield is usually. We want those bottom pods to be, the seeds need to be rattling in there. When we open up the seeds, we don't want to see this green color inside because that we don't want to lock that in, especially with some of our pulses. And again, watch for know your end use and know what's an allowable pre-harvest use or pre-harvest application before you apply anything to any of your crops. So talking about, switching gears, talking about water hemp. This is a tier 1 noxious weed. It was found in the province in 2018. A few populations were found, and by 2019 there was quite a lot of it found in the province. It's a tier 1 noxious weed, which means it must be destroyed without condition. That's exactly how it sounds. It has to be destroyed. It doesn't matter how big, how many plants there are, whether it's one or whether there's 5,000, they have to be destroyed. And this weed is just something that's really, really difficult to deal with. It's worldwide now. It's in different places in the world. It's really bad in the States. We hear a lot about it in the upper part of the States, but it has spread everywhere. There's another one, Palmer amaranthus, coming as well. To my knowledge, we have not seen that yet in Manitoba. It's like water hemp, only worse. So hopefully we don't have to deal with that one ever, or maybe not for a while. But water hemp, we know we have it in the province. We have been eradicating it where we found it. But we need to make sure we're finding all the right populations. In Ontario, it's resistant to groups 2, 5, 7, 9, and 14. Our group 9, obviously, is that oh so important glyphosate. Our group 2 products, these are the products that you'd be using in your IMIs and your SUs and that type of thing. So in Ontario, they found populations here. In general, the amaranth species have a lot of resistance in them. There's a lot of group 2 resistance, even in good old red root pigweed. But we are seeing in water hemp, it is an amaranth species, but it's more aggressive and more resistant than something like a red root pigweed that we've had here since we've started farming, pretty much. Elsewhere in the world, it's resistant to groups 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, 14, 15, and 27. And if you know your herbicide groups, there isn't much else beyond those. There's a few more. I do believe it's resistant to group 6 now, so I should probably have that in there. And some populations may be resistant to group 7. Palmer amaranth is resistant to almost every group. There is cross resistance among groups, so some of the populations might be resistant to 4 or 5 of these groups out of these 8 here, but we are running out of groups to use on these plants. As yet, we don't have a population that's resistant to everything, but there's multiple crossway resistance to this weed. So it's really frightening when you start looking at all these groups and realize that in certain crops like our corn and our soybeans, we are extremely limited to in-crop options. and some of our pre-options, which is our group 14s and some of our group 15s. When we get resistance to that, then we run out of pre-seed weed control as well. So there's basically zero tolerance for this weed. So I'm just going to show you some pictures of this this latest population that we found. And this is a field that's in the arm of Stewartburn. When we find populations, we do not release any data on where those fields are, other than it's in that RM. And that will be, we will be updating the map right away. There's a provincial map that didn't get updated last year just because we didn't have a weed specialist at the time. But now we will be updating with the existing populations. This is the first new population I've found this year. And we are trying to monitor the other places where we found it in the past. However, we do tend to find them like in a soybean field or possibly a corn field. And when we rotate into a canola, like a Liberty Link canola, or a wheat crop, a good competitive cereal or canola crop, the Waterhemp doesn't seem to show up. The in-crop herbicides are still working for those in those crops, and we are seeing good control in subsequent crops in fields that did have Waterhemp in them. We're not able to find the Waterhemp if you grow a good competitive cereal or canola crop. But anyways, this is a field of soybeans. Now the history in this field was corn and then soybeans and then soybeans. So the last 3 years it's been corn, soybeans, soybeans. There has only been glyphosate applied to this field for the last 3 years. So that's a problem. And you can see just the number of plants that are here. This is probably the worst area of the field where there was a lot of these plants. When we look at the size of these plants, that's my glove down there. I've tried to pull this plant out. It's broken off at the base, and this is the size of the root on it. So some of these bigger plants need to be dug out because we can't pull them out. They're just so big. And that's how big these plants can grow in 1 year. Like I'm 5'6", and some of these are taller than me when they're stretched up, and I can't get my arms around them. They have so many branches and things. I can't get my arms around the whole plant. So these plants are capable of producing up to 1 million viable seeds per plant. Normally, though, we're talking in that maybe 300 to 500,000 seeds on a normal regular plant, but these big ones can do up to 1 million seeds. That's actually just a small pill bottle worth of seeds because they're so tiny. These are seeds identical to red root pigweed. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference if you saw the seeds side by side. They're just small, tiny, smaller than the head of a pin, black, shiny little seeds. So very, very similar to, or basically identical to other amaranth seeds. And hard to tell apart. And that's the thing with any type of a tillage, they get moved around in a field, and all of a sudden within a couple of years you have a massive infestation if this weed gets away on you, which is why it's a tier 1 weed. And we have to eradicate it. We can't let it get control. Now we've got a couple pictures here where this field has been sprayed 3 times this year with 1 liter of glyphosate each time. We do see that the glyphosate has some activity on it, but these plants aren't dying and they are going to be setting seed. So it definitely has held them back, but it's not killed them. And there are a lot of small plants coming. Like this weed can germinate all through the year. It can germinate after harvest even, and still set a small number of seeds before freeze up. So we have to be really careful. This is basically right here, if you can see this one. This is a Waterhemp. It's under the canopy. Actually in this field, there was a lot of these weeds that weren't poking up above the crop. There's a lot under the canopy. This one is actually, may have germinated after, may have been sprayed with glyphosate and it just didn't even phase it. But again, we do see a lot in here. So when you see the tall one sticking up above the crop, you can be guaranteed there's a lot more in that crop than you're seeing. And this weed over here, this one definitely has been sprayed as well, and it's shortened it. But again, it's still growing, and it's going to it's going to keep continuing on. So, excuse me, I wanted to showcase this Ontario, this Omafra Pigweed ID guide. Sorry, excuse me. And this is great. If you just even Google Omafra Pigweed ID guide, you can find it. I have it saved as a PDF. Contact me, I can send it to you. It's a really great guide. I downloaded it onto my phone. It's in my iBooks. It's a great PDF. It compares most of the pigweed species that we have and how to tell them apart, which is actually extremely difficult. They do look a lot alike, especially early on in the year, but this time of year we can start to see the differences. Red root pigweed is not going to be you know, it won't get to 5 or 6 or 8 feet tall like a water hemp or a Palmer amaranth will. And just the difference, like they're very smooth stemmed. There's no hairs on them, whereas most of the other pigweed species are hairy, like red root pigweed and all the rest are usually quite hairy. Different degrees of hairs and the amount on the stems, but the smooth stemmed ones are the ones that we have to be really careful with. So this is a guide that's excellent. It works well on your phone, and it's a good thing to have to be able to help identify. And so know the species. Just to follow up, or just in conclusion here to wrap up, if you suspect anything and you think this, I know this isn't a red root pigweed, what is it? We have had other fields sent in that were funny looking pigweeds, and we didn't think they were red root pigweed, but we weren't sure what they were. And so one of them ended up being a tumble pigweed, which is probably, you know, relatively harmless, maybe some group 2 resistance in it, but still definitely not as bad as a water hemp or a Palmer amaranth. Another species that we didn't think was red root pigweed just because it looked very different, the coloring on the leaves was different, it came back as a red root pigweed. So the DNA analysis is what we need to do in order to know for sure what species it is. And if it's one of the 2 species, the water hemp or the Palmer amaranth, then those are tier 1 weeds and those need to be eradicated. So the PSI lab in Winnipeg, I have shared the link before on our crop pest report that comes out Wednesday afternoons, and that's been on there a few times. And again, if you email me, I can send it to you as well, or text me, I'll get it to you. There's one free DNA test for Manitoba Canola Growers Association members. So if you are selling canola and not asking for your checkoff dollars back, you are a member and you can get a free test in addition to the other tests that the PSI lab offers, which are kochia, glyphosate resistance testing, blackleg testing, for the races, that type of thing, verticillium stripe testing, and Klebert testing as well. So there are a number of tests that are available. MCGA members can have one free test of each type of the test. So if you have a pigweed that you're not sure what it is, you know it's not red root, but you don't know what it is, there is a good chance that it's not one of the bad ones. We do have Powell's amaranth here. We have green amaranth or green pigweed. We have Powell's pigweed, green pigweed, we have tumble pigweed as well. There are others in addition to the water hemp and that is showing up. So I also have access to some resistant testing that's done in Ontario. Once we know, we DNA test it. The Ontario labs do DNA testing as well. The PSI lab does not do the resistance testing yet, but the resistance testing done in Ontario, they check for multiple groups. In Manitoba, we can assume it's group 2 and 9 resistant kind of worldwide. That's kind of the assumption. Once you find water hemp, you need to assume it's group 2 and 9 resistant. However, the population that I showed you the pictures of, the resistance testing just came back this morning on it, and it's actually group 9 and group 14. So we knew it was group 9 resistant because it's been sprayed multiple times with glyphosate, not died. But the group 14 resistance, that's some of your in-crop products like your Reflex in soybeans, but that's also some of your pre-products as well that we would be using to go after this species. So that severely limits what we could use going forward for future soybean crops, because when we're limited regardless for in-crop options in soybeans and corn once you have water hemp, because there just aren't a lot of groups that you can use in crop in soybeans and corn. So we rely heavily on our pre-seed herbicides in those crops in order to go after things like water hemp and Palmer amaranth. So this population is already group 14 resistance, so that will severely limit growing those crops on that field in the future. So again, other groups, there is testing for other groups, and again, so that needs to be done because you don't know what other groups it could be resistant to. Again, severely limits your ability to grow soybeans and corn. So far, we've been all right with growing competitive cereals and a competitive canola crop. But again, we do have to watch those crops as well, and watch our fall weed control as well, because this is a weed that can germinate after harvest and still set some seed before freeze up. So with that, I will hand the screen back to Lionel, and if there's questions, just let me know. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Talise, if you could transfer the screen over to me, and while you're doing that, Kim, can you comment? I got a couple of producers have asked if reg loan has been working slower this year because of the smoke conditions, or they're just having more issues with it not working as fast? Have you heard anything of that, like that?
I haven't heard that. Normally though, reg loan, we would want, it works actually better in low light conditions. Like you don't want to be applying that on a hot sunny day. It works better like a late afternoon or evening spraying works really well. You actually want it kind of in low light conditions to give it a chance to kind of, I think the term they use is diffuse across the membranes of the leaves. Even though it is a contact herbicide, you still don't want to, you need to give it time to work. So normally we do apply it, we do apply it in low light conditions. I would be really watching water volumes. I know we've just had a bit of rain recently, but before that we didn't have any for a long time. So I know just in general, like we talk about weeds hardening off and cuticles getting thicker on leaves and bigger wax layers or thicker wax layers and that type of thing. So we talk about chemistry not working as well during these hot, dry periods, and that goes the same for crops too. So we need to make sure we up our water volumes, make sure you're using the appropriate adjuvants, use the maximum rate of adjuvants, especially with something like that. And I would be looking to maybe that first to make sure I was using enough water and using enough adjuvant to get good coverage, because it might just be that our crops are maybe hardened off a bit, but that's my thinking on that.
Okay, good, thanks. Question for John Hurd about winter crops and the dry conditions, wondering about his thoughts on a fall fertilizer program for growing winter crops.
Oh, well, I think that Alex summarized it nicely. I just reinforced that soil testing, probably a good thing if some of these crops are going in after droughted crops. There may well be a good bit of nitrogen left over. And so it's good to do an inventory, before seeding your winter cereal. And can't understate or can't overstate the importance of phosphorus. But don't worry, someone in your township will seed winter wheat without phosphorus, and they will serve to be an example to everyone else in that township. So, but don't be that person. So even though phosphorus is expensive, it's more expensive to not use phosphorus when you're seeding winter wheat. And I guess the other things is that we've seen more potassium deficiency this year's in wheat, canola and corn, or never in canola, but wheat, corn, and soybeans. So if you're testing lower in potassium, it's nice. Potash also provides chloride, which some of the older winter wheats needed. I don't know if Alex knows about whether the new winter wheats are sensitive to physiological leaf spot, but potash is always sometimes useful to supply both nutrients. And something we deal with in the sandier, high pH, low organic matter areas is copper deficiency in winter wheat. Sometimes people on our Mississippi soils will put down part of the copper now and then come back with the rest with the foliar spray. So yeah, there's a number of things for wheat growers to consider, and but it all generally starts with the soil test.
Okay, and putting on, because of the drier conditions, are we concerned with too much phosphate or potash with the seed, or is that kind of going to be okay?
I don't think anyone can afford to put too much phosphorus at today's costs, and our old books say we can put on up to 50, 60 pounds actual phosphate. But potassium, yes, we do know it's a salt, and so it will compete with the seed for precious moisture for germination and can cause salt burn. So close to seed, but not at high rates. If you're going to use it in the seed row, then you have to reduce your phosphorus rate to the same amount so that the total is no more than 50 or 60 pounds either. Yeah, you can, if it's chlorides you need, you can also broadcast your potash, but then that's fairly useless for the potassium component.
Okay, good. Thanks, John. Dane, I got this question the other day. I guess some guys have been watching a bit on Twitter and wondering about growing winter canola in Manitoba. Is that a possibility?
Dane, it shows you're self-muted.
Well, it's John here. I think Dane's silence is a great endorsement that this is a risky practice. I don't know why anyone would be. It's a good lesson for people about learning their agronomy over Twitter. But anyways, Dane, are you ready to tune in?
It's actually showing that Dane is offline, so he may have had a type of technical issue.
Okay, well, we can bring that question back again for next week. I guess one of the things that Dane had sent me a message when Kim was talking was that he heard, and I think this is something we'll need to check into, but the PSI lab changed this year for unlimited testing, or more than one test can be done for free by farmers. But then he commented, he said, unless that was just for club roots. So I think we'll check in for that, or unless Kim, you know something different for than what Dane has said.
Yeah, I thought that I was talking to them and I thought that it was like one test for each. Test was done, but I guess I will look into that and double check on that. Sorry, if I am wrong, I apologize, but that was my understanding that it was one free test of each type of test. I think they do 5 or 6 different tests altogether.
Okay, well, we'll check into that and have that information for next week. Before I go to this question, John Gavlowski, question just come in regarding grasshoppers. Are we getting to the end of some of the stages of these guys? Or are we going to deal with them right through till the end of September, October? Hello, John. Talise, can you hear me?
It shows that John is unmuted.
Okay.
I'm not sure why we're not able to hear him.
Maybe we're just having some problems. I'll just keep going on. We pretty much used our hour for today anyway, so we can answer some of these questions next week. Been getting some questions regarding putting canola up for feed, and it's been coming through the 1-800 line. And yes, canola can be put up for feed. It makes actually pretty decent feed. I think the biggest concern, if you're going to be doing it, is you need to be getting it in the proper condition for storage. And I think that's the problems we might run into sometimes. So dry down or silage, I think those will be the things you need to be concerned about, and storage. But feed wise makes up to 14% protein and 60% TDN. So that would work. Again, there is the BMP 503 that's available for producers that are looking for water or alternate sources of water. So that program is still running. So if you're needing that, definitely contact the two, Andrea or Colleen, and they can walk you through the process. Our hay listing service is getting lots of calls. So if you're needing hay or you got hay for sale, definitely go to that website. The crop residue burning authorization is up and running again. So if you're looking at burning, definitely check that. There's lots of RMs that have no burning allowed at all right now, even if we got this little bit of rain. So definitely make sure you're following all the right processes before you go out and start fields on fire. Our ag adaptation specialists in the province, their contact information, and our forage and livestock people as well. So there's their contact information. And the MASC offices, I'm sure they're busy right now with whether it's getting producers phoning in about checking fields off or getting fields written off for haying or for just doing regular crop insurance. So there's their numbers and their locations, their toll-free number, our toll-free number, and again, I put the hay listing there. And that'll do it for this week. I'd like to thank everybody for attending and our panel and our speakers, and we'll see you next week, August 18th. Thanks for attending.